Welcome, everyone. It's so great to have you all for session 2 of this conference. We're here right now to talk about the role of entrepreneurial startups in the aftermath of conflicts in the Middle East and North African region, and also to talk about what some of the roadblocks in both the private and public sector can be. We've got a terrific set of panelists. I'm so excited for you guys to meet. Everyone here that we've gathered can bring us real world examples of the benefits of fostering these startups. We've got a very quick introduction for each person. We've got Omar Christitis, the founder and CEO of ArabNet Media Company. Jaideep Danoa is a co-founder and CEO of Phoenix, which is an e-mobility super app. Auke Lutzme is currently the UNDP representative in Iraq. And Mona Itani, and I think my favorite description for her that I saw on LinkedIn is that she is change maker. So I'll let her share more with you about her background. And just to kick things off, a broad question for our panelists, and just to let the rest of the group watching know that we will get to Q&A afterwards. So I do hope that everyone puts in their questions for this terrific panel so we can keep a dynamic discussion going. The first question I just want to throw at you, and anyone is welcome to pick up on this, is what's the hardest thing? Just a very simple question. What's the hardest thing about being an entrepreneur in a country where there is ongoing conflict or even war?
You want me to start, Selena?
Yes, please.
Kick it off. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just to say, I just joined the UN in Iraq, but I spent 6 years before this in Yemen. So, I think Yemen is probably known in the world as one of the worst humanitarian crises yet, and still is. And therefore, problems for the private sector, and particularly for startups, are very current in that environment, right? And particularly, if you have ongoing conflict, it basically means also that there is very little security for startups to start in terms of, obtaining capital, being able to spend it, but also to expect any kind of return on investment, in the activities that they, deploy in those sort of circumstances. So the risk, as such, is very high for them in terms of, potentially failing their company or their enterprise, and there is very little safety nets for particularly young people to, first of all, to obtain the capital, also to be able to have a successful company in that environment, even if they have a very very interesting and good business concept. It remains very difficult for them to take it forward and make it successful.
Okay, I know that you're not in Yemen currently these days, but can you talk more specifically about startups in Yemen for us?
Yeah, in fact, when you ask this question, something comes to mind. Actually, somebody I know personally, and perhaps that will illuminate a little bit more. This is actually an illiterate woman that I met in Yemen, which is one of our beneficiaries of our one of our projects in Yemen. Her name was Iman. And imagine, particularly in the Yemen context, becoming a woman, a female entrepreneur is extremely difficult, particularly in this, cultural context there. Now, this woman turned out, after being a beneficiary and starting up a business, she turned out to be on the list of the 100 most influential women in the world by the BBC. This is 2 years ago. And this woman also managed to present herself, and present her business at the COP27, which just took place in Egypt in Sharm el-Sheikh. So coming from a small, tiny village in Yemen to the COP27, sort of, a metaphor of her journey becoming a successful entrepreneur. So what was this all about? She was assisted with a couple of solar panels in her village and started up a business of distributing electricity in the village that didn't have any electricity at all. So basically, she was selling electricity, to the neighbors and so on, and made a business out of it. And then based on her profits, she also then provided small loans to the villagers there and sort of expanding her business that way. Now, I think that she is a success story, but I think the challenge that we face in general is really then how to scale this up, right? Because this is like in a remote village, okay, they have some success, but how can we facilitate, the private sector to step in and then, expand it, scale it, and so on and so forth. And, we've been thinking about various mechanisms how to do so. For example, set up a guarantee fund so that, for example, for private investors, the risk is less, and so on and so forth. But I think one thing that it really does in terms of stabilizing communities and so on, that really brings the community together about certain common projects that they can benefit from, particularly in these dire circumstances, when you're living in a war-torn country.
And, here in the West and, United States, most of Europe, it can be really hard to comprehend just how difficult it is for entrepreneurs like you to not only launch a business in these conflict areas, but also sustain it. I'd like to hear about some of those challenges. And I wonder if, Omar, you could share with us a little bit about starting a media company, sort of the context of that.
Sure. So just as a quick brief, my company, ArabNet, we run the largest conferences and we run also publications and research for tech and startups in the Middle East. And so beyond my own experience as an entrepreneur, we've helped hundreds of companies pitch, get connected with investors, grow. And we do a lot of research assessing startup ecosystems across the region. Our most recent one is a publication on the impact of the Lebanese economic crisis on entrepreneurship in Lebanon. I don't want to talk about Lebanon in particular because we have a regional view in this panel, but I will talk about, first of all, a intellectual framework for assessing ecosystems. We often use the Babson model for ecosystems, assessing entrepreneurial ecosystems. And some of the main pillars of that would be things like access to capital, access to customers, access to talent, fostering regulations. And so infrastructure, another one. And when I look at, MENA and some of the challenges that we have, certainly in conflict markets, what we can see is poor infrastructure can be a key issue, whether that's infrastructure for payment, for delivery, for even addresses. There are a lot of infrastructure issues that can also double as opportunities, and I'll mention that shortly. Two is old regulations, outdated regulations. Three, incumbents and entrenched interest with large players that have relationships with government and other stakeholders, which make a less competitive playing field. You could have immature capital. Capital is looking for low-hanging fruit opportunities, extracting high interests or seeking profits that are, or stakes in these companies that are out of line with maybe global standards or what's best for the entrepreneurs. And talent is on the fence. You could have some inexperienced talent, but there is also a lot of youth. And then the positives that come out of this, there's a lot of demand. There's a lot of young people. They are demanding products and services, and they are a great pool of talent. Two, you have a nascent market with a lot of untapped opportunities. There's a lot of green fields, right? And there may be even additional problems. Today in Lebanon, with the collapse of the banking system, necessity is the mother of invention. It has pushed us to come up with new innovative financial services, right? So I guess based on the pillars that I just presented, we can see some that are clear challenges for operating a startup in our markets, and some that can actually lend themselves to be opportunities.
That's really interesting. You're now pointing our discussion toward the public and private sector struggles that I want to get into a little bit more. I wonder if, Mona, you can talk to us a little bit about what you would like to hear from government officials and development agencies to help unlock some money and also clear regulatory hurdles and other problems.
Yes, sure. Thank you for the question. So basically, I believe that the governments, as well as different development agencies that are supporting the region, are very well aware of the importance of entrepreneurship, because unfortunately there aren't enough economic opportunities, especially when it comes to the youth. So this is why entrepreneurship is important, because in their minds, and of course it is somehow true, that this will create job opportunities. The youth don't have just to rely on the government or other parties to have jobs, but they will create their own jobs, and maybe meanwhile they can create more jobs for other people. But I don't think that this is the only way that we should think about it. I totally believe that we should think about entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial mindset and skill set as more than just that. So definitely it has an economic impact, but I would say it really has a societal impact as well, because based on the first question you asked, so these areas with like severe conflicts have a different kind of context than any other country. So hope is low, motivation is low, challenges are immense, market is very volatile. So individual needs, many times they actually are above and beyond any broader picture for these people. Like the individual needs are more important than the economic needs or the societal needs. So this is why we need to enforce this entrepreneurial mindset, because it will actually help people to think differently, to first of all think in a more open-minded way, and to think how they can think beyond themselves and do things that surpass their individual self. And I would say that what is missing here, because like nowadays in Lebanon, for example, whenever we do a hackathon or a training program or an acceleration program, we see that a lot of entrepreneurs, especially youth, are thinking about social related problems, because these are the eminent problems in the society. However, if you think about it from the investment perspective and the priorities perspective, it's not a priority. Like these societal problems, social entrepreneurship, impact investment is definitely lacking and not existing, I would say, in our region. And definitely I would like to see more of that coming, because if it's a conflict area, if we know all of these issues and we want to foster entrepreneurship, we cannot neglect like social impact entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship, because I would say this could actually really help not just these individuals and the economy, but help solve these problems. I think we're going to talk more about peace building later in the discussion. So I would definitely like to see more a broader look at entrepreneurship from this perspective, and an openness towards impact investment, which we don't see at the moment.
Jaideep, I'd love to hear from you on some of these issues, particularly on the private-public sector front.
Yes, so a quick intro. My name is Jaideep. My company, Phoenix, we're the leading electric mobility platform in the region. Mobility, of course, enabler for opportunity, getting us to work and school and the mall, etc. And want to reduce the cost to move so we can move more and do more. So just speaking from, I guess, entrepreneurs' viewpoint, and we are a regional platform. One of the challenges, and I think the group has summarized a lot of them. So one of the major challenges for us when it comes to frontier markets is really just the risk appetite from our investors. Right? Today, there's just there's lack of investment appetite for these markets. Although like there's definitely tremendous opportunity because they are underinvested by definition, and so there is all of these like low-hanging fruit of needs that are starving for investment, but we don't have a case that we can't, when we manage our portfolio, allocate resources to frontier markets because our investors won't support it. So I think this is like one of the major challenges, is like how do we as entrepreneurs find models that allow us to enable these markets with our platforms, our technologies, our IP that we've built. And so one of the concepts that we're now we've just started pursuing is more like it's actually a traditional model. It's a franchise model, but with tech, and where we can look at we call them non-core markets, but where there is a market. There's an existing demand pool, and there are local entrepreneurs who understand the market and how to tackle the risks in the market, and want to bring this product to their market. And we give them all of our basically our technology that we've built, and our expertise, our know-how, and they have the local insights, and can operate much more effectively than us. And it's basically a way that we can do the risk sharing that can be more acceptable for like our investors as well. I honestly feel like this is one of the biggest hindrances when it comes to these ecosystems is really lack of capital. I mean, there's so many young people that people will find a way right? To hustle and get something started. And there's so many tools to like learn how to code online, etc. But we need capital that's pursuing like a business outcome, but just dearth of capital in these frontier markets. That's just our own experience.
But there is a lot of capital, Jaideep. But it's for some stuff and not others, right? So it's for maybe less risky business models because investors don't want to take as much business model risk. Or is that different from what you've experienced?
Well,
there's billions of dollars being poured in everywhere in these markets.
Another kind of worms. Like I would say there's limited venture dollars in the Middle East in general as a percentage of income. And,
almost $3 billion invested last year, though. Almost $3 billion. That's a large number.
It's relative. Right? If you look compared to other geographies, it's not much. Percentage of GDP is not much. But yes, to your point, like venture dollars in frontier markets is not there.
Omar, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you think of why there's a different perception here.
I agree with Jaideep. I was just curious to kind of see exactly where we were on this topic. I tend to think that in our markets, investors are a little bit more risk averse. There is a lot of capital, but there's more risk aversion. And partially what an investor might say is, hey, listen, I'm taking geography risk. I am inherently working in a market which is a frontier market. I can't also take on top of it a business model risk. So what I would rather do is invest in a proven business model that's effective somewhere else, and I don't have to be guessing here. And the other thing, I think some investors have been burned by being a bit too early to move, right? They might see a global trend, they get in on that trend in MENA, and then they realize, well, MENA's not quite there yet, or MENA's going to take a different angle towards this. So I do think that raising capital in the region, there is a lot of money, but there's a lot of herd mentality within the investor community. We see a lot of Me Too action going on. Fintech is now the hot thing, so everybody's investing in a fintech. It doesn't matter we can do 6 of the same copies of the same fintech and still raise money, because that's what investors want. And so there's a bit of hype and chasing after hype, and there's a bit of risk aversion. I don't know, maybe others have points on this.
Yeah, I wonder, Auke, if you could talk to us a little bit about how businesses can attract investment, how to persuade investors to be able to stomach the risk and help them see what their return might be.
Right. So let me think of an example that. Right. So let me talk about coffee. Right. This is, I think, a good example of how even under the worst conditions, it can still attract investment if the proposition is interesting enough. Perhaps you know that Yemen is considered the cradle of coffee, right? In fact, the first coffee plants were exported through a port city in Yemen called Mocha. This is also where the name, is coming from. And if you look at the quality of coffee in the world, actually the Yemeni coffee is cupping the highest in the world. So on the scale from 1 to 100, it cups at, this is the technical term, but it's kind of rated at, the 93 or 94 on the scale of 100. So it's really, premium coffee, right? Now, farmers in Yemen are growing coffee.
think we have, okay, has frozen just a little bit. All right, we will see if he catches up. Give him a few seconds. Mona, I wonder if we could briefly turn to you and just get your sense of some of the challenges of convincing money to come through the doors.
Sure. So definitely this is a double-sided problem. On one hand, I echo what Omar was saying about having robust business models. And definitely this is something that's very important. And this is part of the ecosystem's responsibility to make sure that entrepreneurs who are working on their businesses actually have that in mind. So it's something important. But at the same time, also definitely we have, I don't want to call it like, I don't want to be harsh, but I don't think that investors in the region are educated enough about, again, different types of investment. Maybe, yes, they imitate others, or they have a narrow view on investment. And it's not something I'm saying, but like this is something we hear from many stakeholders in the ecosystem. Also, because I'm a change maker, as you called me, I'm mainly involved in social innovation and social entrepreneurship activities. Definitely, as I mentioned earlier, there is a complete absence of impact investment and definitely zero education in that sense. So again, I understand the challenges when you want to invest in impact-driven businesses. There should still be a robust business model, which we do not see many times. So I think definitely it's a double-sided problem. We as ecosystem players who are supporting small businesses or early stage startup businesses and aspiring entrepreneurs, we are working to strengthen that element to have more robust business models that attract investment. But also, I would say some other stakeholders, including governments, should play a role in terms of more education for investors, more openness about different types of investments, because also the types of investment that you find in our region are very limited. Whereas if you look at Europe, for example, you can find many other types available. So we want some diversity as well, because we cannot just think of, even the US, I mean, they are getting more and more diverse. Impact investment has become a thing in the US, which is the cradle of commercial entrepreneurship and so on. So I think we should learn a little bit from that and have different types of investments as well.
Alke, it looks like we've got you back after a brief interlude, and we're all eager to hear about coffee.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Anyway, it happens sometimes in Iraq. Yeah, I was, going on about, how coffee in Yemen is the greatest in the world, but we were trying to help young entrepreneurs to actually make that known to the rest of the world, and helping also to export this coffee to some of the, the premium coffee markets that we had. So we worked with a number of young entrepreneurs in Yemen to actually make that happen. So basically, setting up their business, working with the farmers, making sure they're having access to good quality coffee in sufficient quantities, helping them to overcome some of the export logistics of getting the coffee actually out of the country. Because, if you work in a country in conflict, these logistics are probably one of the hardest ones to overcome. Literally, sometimes a container of coffee has to cross the front lines to be able to be put on a ship and taken out of Yemen, for example. So there are very huge challenges with this. But at the same time, working with these young entrepreneurs is so rewarding in the sense that they always find solutions to these kind of problems, as well. It's just that they need some technical assistance, they need some access to finance, and they need also some help in order to be able to brand and market their products. And I think if you have any chance, I would recommend to read the book, The Monk of Mecca, which actually explains this in detail through a fictional story, but it's actually one of the entrepreneurs that we have helped, to establish his business and taking it forward.
So what is it that some of these entrepreneurs specifically need and want from their governments? I mean, I know in Yemen, there is no established government, but from whoever is, even neighboring countries or NGOs.
Well, they need assistance. For example, if you want to if you take the example of coffee, and I will just take it a little bit forward, they need access to a lab to be able to test the quality of the coffee, right? So if that doesn't exist, they would be wanting to have international agencies or the government, if it exists, or help from outside private sector, or even corporate social responsibility from some of the bigger coffee companies in the world to help them to establish this lab, for example, so to be able to show to potential buyers that this is the quality of the coffee that they have. And this is very technical, but at the same time, it's very crucial, for the actual product that they sell. And, in Yemen, this has actually happened that way, in terms of international alliance, help from local aid agencies on the ground, but also some of help from the coffee producers, in the country itself.
What this brings to mind is a way for the region and other countries nearby to work together and help startups in other countries nearby. So Jaideep, I actually wonder if there's, you can talk about some of the franchise models that your company, Phoenix, is working on to develop how you support partners with tech and other services that you can sort of capitalize on.
Yeah, so I guess a couple things that I want to share here. I mean, the first one is so we're kind of building or integrating some of the core infrastructure in our economies, which is like mobility, and bringing new business models in mobility to drive more efficiency and more equitable access to opportunity, etc. But to do this, we are definitely not able to do it just by ourselves as a venture investing, capital and talent and etc. vehicles, etc. It is truly, unfortunately or fortunately, public-private partnership, which relies on the government and many different agencies in the government. I think the panel was talking about regulatory kind of access and support, etc. And this is one of the key obstacles we face that creates risk on our ability to grow in a market. It's just regulatory uncertainty. So working with the government, yes, working with talent, working with investors, and working with other kind of consumer stakeholders. We need the full jigsaw puzzle to fit together for a business to get our sort of business to get actualized in each of these countries. And so even working with franchise partners, we need to help them evangelize that ecosystem so that it can get unlocked. I think that just rewinding a bit, one of the other topics we were talking about was, how do we get more venture capital, in this market, in this region. And just from my own experience, I've worked in a few ecosystems. I worked in Southeast Asia, in India, in the Valley. I feel like here in the Middle East, I came back here because I felt this was the next Southeast Asia. This is many small countries, but aggregate, extremely meaningful populace. And we need to do a better job of giving that narrative of what is the domestic market opportunity in this footprint. That yes, there are emerging markets and frontier markets and developed markets, and that combination is actually more meaningful than other emerging market blocks like India or Latin America or Africa or Southeast Asia, which have been able to unlock this sort of venture capital excitement. And I think that's one of the challenges we face, is so much of the coverage around our region is really around conflict rather than about the potential with our extremely young, extremely digitally native populace and under digitized economies, which is where there's obvious low-hanging fruit that is going to be realized. And I think that's one of the major obstacles that we're facing.
Omar, I'd love to hear from you on this. Oh, you're mute.
I wanted to build on this and talk about regulatory harmonization, right? This idea that we are an Arab market. Oftentimes companies talk about capturing Arab markets, but in fact, to expand from one market to the next is the equivalent of setting up an entirely new company. You have a whole bunch of processes and costs for the setup. You have totally different rules and regulations, multiple regulators at each local level. So building a fintech or any company that actually has some regulatory component is extremely challenging and makes it far less attractive for an investor who thinks about scale, because each of these markets are tiny. Actually, in altogether, the Middle East is still relatively small compared to developed markets like Europe, where a single country in Europe could have the GDP of the entire region of MENA, right? So there is a lot of rhetoric around competition today for who will be, which country can be the capital of entrepreneurship in the region. And I think that's somehow that we're missing the point that if we actually don't all collaborate and create a sense of scale in the region, we are less exciting for anyone who looks at this market as an opportunity. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, that is interesting about the sense of scale there. Umar, if you had a message for governments, what is there, to tell them these are your responsibilities to help pave the way for the kind of business that you've started, what would you say?
So I have another talking point that is very near and dear to my heart, which is the question of what is the role of government? Should the government be a regulator? Should it be an enabler? Or should it be an operator? And with the rapid degree of what I love, someone called it leader-led development taking place in the Middle East today, right? With centralized authority that is driving mega projects in terms of economic development and business. What we are seeing often is that the government is playing the role of operator, and the government is actually competing directly with the private sector, right? That includes for us today as an events company. The largest events in the region have gone from being privately managed event to being publicly owned, privately delivered, right? So I've gone from delivering much of my own branded services to being a service provider for the government as they deliver their activities. And it's not just in my sector, across the board. If you speak to private sector leaders, you hear a lot about crowding out of the private sector. You hear a lot about the question of whether the role of the government should be an operator, should be setting up companies, as opposed to really just enabling, fostering, providing, access to capital or training talent or providing incentives and benefits that align the interests of the companies with the economic development plans of the country. So if I were to say something, I would say, the role of government is not to be an operator. The role of government is to be an enabler and a regulator, and that these governments should be focusing on opening highways amongst each other so that the entire region matters to someone looking from the outside.
I'd like to pivot the conversation toward Mona a little bit. With your experience and your background at the American University in Beirut, you bring sort of the social piece of this, and also just working with young women, entrepreneurs from different backgrounds. I wonder if you can talk to us about how young people in communities in conflict affect each other, how they can help each other, and kind of rise above some of the problems that are there at like the political and diplomatic level to help people come together.
Yes, thank you. I just want to pinpoint that I believe that what Omar was talking about at his final point maybe are not the governments that that are operating in the conflict zones, but more like the Gulf. And for me, these are very distinct, like sets of countries. And I mean, I'm not going to get into why maybe these governments are doing that, but in the areas of conflict, I would say that the role of government is almost, again, absent. And this is why you see that a lot of non-governmental organizations or even private institutions supporting entrepreneurship are playing a major role, and not just supporting entrepreneurship, but also implanting the seed of entrepreneurship in the youth. And we receive a lot of grants. There are a lot of programs around that. And the whole purpose, I mean, at least how I see it, it's not just to, again, create businesses and to foster economic development. This is part of it. But more importantly, it's to actually change the mindset of the youth. And I mean, I just want to give a bit of context. I'm currently in India, okay? And I'm here for the Unleash Global Innovation Lab, which hosts more than 1,000 global talents from across the world who come and convene for 1 week time and work on solutions for problems related to the Sustainable Development Goals or the UN 2030 Agenda by following a very specific process, which Unleash called the Unleash Innovation Process, which is really adapted from design thinking process, lean startup methodology, and so on. This is what I do at AUB. This is what I do also in my EdTech startup. And the whole reason of doing that is that because we highly believe that when the youth are equipped with the right mindset, okay, they will actually change the world. So we believe that this mindset would have a ripple effect in terms of not just creating businesses, but more than that, even if they don't want to create their business, because entrepreneurship is not for everyone and it's not supposed to be for everyone, but they can, it will enhance their opportunities to find jobs, for example, or maybe go find a scholarship program in different university abroad. It will give opportunities for them to just leave the country, which again, from an empathetic perspective, we have to understand and respect. It will give them the opportunities to create change, okay, in their communities. So it really, it also allows them to have more understanding of people who do not look like them, who are usually in like the opposite side. I have great examples from Lebanon, particularly in areas of conflict. For example, in the north of Lebanon, there's an NGO called Ruwad At-Tanmiya, or in English, Pioneers of Development. And actually what they do is that they put together youth from the two opposing groups of Bebet Tabbani and Jabal Mahsen, and they take them together through a scholarship program where they upskill them, but at the same time, they do community service together and they work on entrepreneurship projects together. So this kind of, social cohesion, it's peace building, definitely, it's entrepreneurial upskilling, mindset shaping, I think is very important, even if they don't end up creating actual businesses, but it would help in many, many other ways. So this is why we are emphasizing so much, not just at AUB, I would say, not just at the American University of Beirut, but many, many other universities in the region, on these skills, because I believe they are 21st century skills. For me, entrepreneurial skills are not just to start a business. Entrepreneurship is not just an activity, it is a mindset. And it definitely helps them navigate the problems in these conflict areas, which are very tough, very challenging, definitely very different than other parts of the world. And it would help them be better citizens, like really caring and wanting to have an impact. Doesn't have to be a social impact, but it's an impact nevertheless. So this is where I'm coming from. Definitely social innovation, entrepreneurship is something I've been working on for many years now. And I really hope that it just keeps emerging, even in the more fortunate countries in the region. So even in the Gulf, I hope that this would be given more importance and not just focusing on fintechs and the other trendy startups, as Omar mentioned, but maybe looking at entrepreneurship in a more holistic view.
So one, I just want to remind our viewers that now is a great time to put in some more questions, because I will turn to Q&A pretty soon. But I did, Mona, just to broaden what you were telling us about, or deepen it really, tell me a little bit more about the mindset that young people have, the kind of qualities that drives entrepreneurship, bridge building, sharing ideas, bringing these things together, and then that energy that you need that can go above these the conflict that they live in their day-to-day lives.
So definitely at the beginning, I mean, a lot of these elements that are important or ingredients that are important for success would be missing. And again, this is the role of the ecosystem and the enablers and the support organizations to actually make these aspiring entrepreneurs or change makers, let's call them, understand what it takes to make this change. So it takes talking to one another, even if they don't look like us and they don't speak the same language. It takes us being, again, open-minded towards newer markets. A lot of our youth come and say, oh, like my target is Lebanon. Like, why is your target just Lebanon? Or it's like my village or my city, or like, why don't you think of other markets? What would prevent you? How can you think of a scalable business model? So all of these are questions that like we pick their brains with, I would say, and it's a process. Like it's a journey of change. It's a personal change. It's a attitude change, behavioral change. But that we have seen. And because, I mean, personally, I started working with these people at 15 years of age, so at a young age. So you can see it materializing fairly quickly. So in like 2-3 years time, you can see them really how their attitudes have changed, how their narrative has changed, how they're also, they start giving back to this community. So through mentorship, I would say mentorship also is very important. Because many times these young people come with a certain mindset that's often closed. And by talking to these mentors who maybe could be successful entrepreneurs or maybe investors or other people who have experience in this kind of field, they would learn so much from them, and they would really open their eyes to things that they have never thought of before. So definitely there's a very important role of mentorship. And this is also, I need to pinpoint that it's important to have like an enabling ecosystem. And this is back to your point of what do we need from the government? Like we need to have an enabling ecosystem, because entrepreneurship, especially if it wants to start from an early age, is a whole journey. It's not something that like you just go into an acceleration program and you have your business and it's going to succeed. It's in a conflict zone. This is very difficult. So it needs like multiple programs, multiple rounds of mentorship, many mentors, in order for these people to achieve the success that they want, or the wealth, because this is a long-term process, and this could also be frustrating, and many people might not be willing to give it the time it needs. So this is another challenge on top of everything. So you have to be super perseverant, super patient, and again, these are qualities that I think entrepreneurship can give you in this kind of setting.
I can turn to the gentleman. I'd love to hear from maybe Jaideep or Auke what you guys see in terms of the next generation of entrepreneurs coming through.
I'm going to take this one.
Please jump in.
Look, there's today, the modern day like heroes are the entrepreneurs, the Elon Musk and everyone else. They get so much coverage, and I think it's like inspiring for a lot of youth that wants to make change happen. And we can do it. We don't need to like live in the corporate job for my whole career at one company, etc. I don't think that's the what's youth are envisioning for their lives. So I go back to like when we look at the demographics, we're now we're out of date. All of the panelists here, right? We're talking about Gen Z, which is like the bulk of the populace, Gen Z and even younger. I don't know what's after Z, that are growing up with smartphones around them, and have access to these apps that are built all over the world, and access to knowledge from all over the world. Right? I don't think we can really process, what is coming up in the next 10 years. There's like codeless, no code kind of tools that allow you to build apps. There's like this whole generative AI sort of technologies now with chat GPT and like image generations, etc. And so it doesn't matter anymore like where you are for a lot of businesses. And if you're a content creator, or you're servicing consumers in other geographies with your SaaS platforms, right? We're really removing a lot of the physical constraints due to birth. This is where you're born. This is where your opportunity is limited to. So let's see, right? I mean, I'm like pretty excited about like what I see with the youth. I think everyone wants to build an app and take charge of their own life, right? Be a change agent on their own life. But maybe I'm speaking out of privilege, what I'm seeing. That's just my 2 cents.
Wonderful. Omar, I wonder if I can ask you what the future looks like if it was closer to what you would like to see.
Well, I'll just, before I get into that, I want to comment on this idea of Elon Musk and social entrepreneurship and where we are and the new generation. One of the things we do know about the new generation statistically, I mean from surveys, is that they're maybe the most impact-oriented conscious consumers of all the other generations today. And this for me is heartening, because when I think about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos as our icons, I get very concerned. And I understand these guys have been massively successful and made a lot of money for themselves and even have promised to donate most of their money. But I also know that in the crisis, Amazon workers were stopping to urinate in toilets because they couldn't get work breaks. And I wonder about, the kind of message we send with these people as our role models, why we don't get more social entrepreneurs becomes more clear, right? And if we want more social entrepreneurs, it's going to take a cultural shift for us as a society to value and celebrate those models of success, perhaps even more than models of success that generate tremendous returns for the founder, but little returns for society. And that I won't venture to say, and I know there's a lot of defenders who will tell me Elon Musk is going to take us to the moon and Jeff Bezos has created the most efficient, e-commerce company in the world. But, I think we need to shift to stakeholder value maximization and to thinking about our stakeholders as society if we want to see more, more impact. So yeah, I would say maybe what's going to end up happening, if you ask me about the future, maybe what's going to happen is that the consumer itself, the consumer himself or herself, will be demanding this from the companies. Will be voting with their feet and saying, I won't buy from you because your practices are poor when it comes to your employees, when it comes to your local markets, when it comes to your supply chain. And I'm going to buy from you because you're setting the right example that's consistent with my values. And I hope if we have that bottom up, we can get some of these companies to change. Because right now, I think companies are more powerful than than governments in many places. Lobbyists have some tremendous power. And yeah, those are just some of my philosophical thoughts on the question.
And I mean, what would it take, do you think, to incentivize more people to start operating in these countries? What could governments or development agencies do to mitigate some risks?
So we are seeing a lot of risk sharing in terms of funds. So if you want to come and open a fund, we will de-risk your fund by putting in some capital or protecting your downside for investing in our country. Unfortunately, that comes often with a lot of strings attached, so it doesn't have the same free market mechanism as it might otherwise have. I think we are talking about cultural shifts more than other stuff. I mean, I think if you look at investors in the Middle East, they're looking for a certain type, you'll hear this often from entrepreneurs, they're looking for a certain type of pedigree. Ex-McKinsey, Harvard Business School, and if you don't fit that box, you might not get funded. right? Or if you're not looking to build $1 billion fintech company, you might not get funded. Those are not going to change by regulatory shifts. I think that those need a cultural shift.
So I have I'm going to turn to some of the terrific questions that have come through, and to the audience, please keep sending more. One for Auke from Ali Kamuna at UNDP. Ali asks, what are the best paths that should be taken by local authorities to strengthen digital transportation at the subnational level to enhance public services?
I think you're punching the most difficult question to me, it seems to me. You know, it depends, of course, first of all, a bit in the environment that we're in. I was giving examples for Yemen, and Yemen, there is no electricity grid, there is hardly any internet, so that makes it, of course, very complicated, right? So in other countries, it's not the same, are not the same conditions prevalent, I would say. So I would think that, when it comes to sort of the digital highway and empowering particularly local authorities to give more space to private sector to invest in these sort of areas is one way of dealing with this. But I don't think there is a cookie cutter approach to this one, because it really depends, I think, on the conditions in the country, the regulatory environment, the fact to what extent the private sector has penetrated in this as well. So, I would rather say that it depends really on the situation.
Another question that we got is from Huda Salman, who thanks the panel for the terrific insights, and also asks, what do you think is needed to mobilize local capital across the capital spectrum, from grants to market rate capital, towards higher risk business models and towards countries, in a way that also lowers the ecosystem's dependence on international development aid from outside the region? I'm not sure who wants to take this one. Omar.
So I'll just say what we have seen is we've seen some of this done by the de-risking, by the fund of funds mechanisms. Other ways, I think, so one, what are the sources of capital? The government has a big source of capital. Big families in the region have a lot of capital, but those families tend to be a bit more traditional in their outlook and in their investment strategy. So getting those to shift, maybe it's educational, maybe it's different types of initiatives, but I think that bucket is still untapped. And certainly the banking industry has failed SMEs in the region. I don't know how this could be addressed, given that banking is notoriously risk averse. I would say maybe if there were more competition. Historically, the banking sector is also protected by licenses and kinds of regulations. And as we see open banking take over in the region and fintechs really starting to give banks a run for their money, we are starting to see fintechs that are trying to tackle the SME financing component. And just the nature of having those fintechs try to tackle this will get the banks moving. So the more we have young, dynamic players that are willing to tackle these areas, the more we're going to see banks have to respond and have to get into areas that they've been historically uncomfortable.
Jaideep, did you have anything to add to that?
I think Omar is doing a good job here.
So I do have a couple of questions that have come through, and it sounds like our audience wants to know a little bit more about economic integration within the region. A great question came through from Temina Akhtar about how countries competing to be leaders in entrepreneurship, a point that Omar made, they're missing the point, given how markets in the region are small and they are fragmented. Are there some concrete steps that you could suggest that entrepreneurs would like to see in governments in the region in order to boost regional economic cooperation and open up markets and commerce? She points out Africa's example in establishing the Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
Jaideep, go for it this time. I don't want to steal your thunder.
I don't know where to begin. I mean, it's almost like, you have to be a real optimist. Of course, a free movement of goods, there are a lot of precedents of these economic blocs in Africa, ASEAN, EU, that would be great. I think being able to have a single company, that you can operate in all of these markets also reduces a lot, and bank accounts, etc. Those are like structural costs to entrepreneurship. They're quite sizable, and some of this is happening, but allowing for like foreign ownership of businesses, even 100%, without requiring the local partner. Maybe this is a GCC issue, but that creates a lot of legal costs for how do you still retain control and economic interest, and there's a lot of education with new participants in this economy and how it works. And these are some of the obvious areas. Omar was also talking about even regulatory standardization. I mean, the fact that you have different ministries, not just on a national basis, but even on like a city basis, creates huge headwinds to disrupting industries or changing industries, maybe is a better word. And if that can be standardized nationally and even as a group of nations, it would make things far more attractive for investment.
What's the first step? I know this is such a broad question. It's kind of Pollyanna thinking, oh, we're all going to work together. We're all going to row in the same direction, especially in conflict regions. What's a first baby step that you would want to see that would signal some kind of real effort?
So I just want to say one thing, because there's also this topic of the different centers of gravity that are competing to be like entrepreneurial centers. Actually, I think that's awesome, because these cities are now competing for talent, right? Competing to attract businesses and make it easier to do business. And so I hope that there's actually more of that competition to be the best, to attract the best, and reduce these structural friction layers, obstacles, etc. in starting up.
Omar, you're ready and poised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say you're asking for a very clear, concrete, and first step initiative, a concept called passporting, right? And this is the idea, and it already exists in some trade areas, where effectively, once you're licensed to operate within a certain country, that you are passported into countries that have a shared agreement in this, with minimal additional regulation or paperwork or oversight. And this exists, for example, for fintech companies in the EU region. But we could work towards, even if we don't work towards real regulatory harmonization, something that says if you graduate from the regulatory sandbox of the Central Bank of Kuwait, you are automatically allowed to participate in activities run by the Central Bank of Bahrain or the Central Bank of Cairo, and that could be just a step towards that direction. And the one thing I'll say, Jaideep, to your point, I think it's theoretically great if the competition leads to benefits for everyone, but I think sometimes it can actually be detrimental, right? People are putting in some barriers to operating, like we won't give you business if you're not based in our home market. And I would find that's a kind of anti-competitive or anti-collaborative competitive direction. If I'm saying, hey, talent, come here, I'm going to give you the best, that's great. And that's be good for everyone. But if I'm saying, I will not give you work unless you're based here, that seems a bit more competitive and less beneficial for everyone involved.
We have a couple of questions here that came through, and I'm going to I'm going to see if Mona would like to take them. One is about the benefit of mentorship for new entrepreneurs and what role NGOs can play in creating relationships between established entrepreneurs, many of whom are on this panel, and young ones who are coming through and hoping to bring some of their thirst and hunger into the ecosystem.
Yeah, so I just want to say that when I actually started working in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was just a researcher working on my PhD thesis. And honestly, it hooked me into the system because entrepreneurs were always very helpful, always ready to give back and share. And this is always the case. It's still the case, even in like the most difficult times. It has always been the case. So I think it's really easy to tap into entrepreneurs like completely for free. Of course, if they get paid, they wouldn't say no as well, but like completely for free to help other entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs and to share with them insights. And again, this would help into this whole like education, training and acceleration process that a lot of the young entrepreneurs need. We've seen many good examples where simply these supporting entities would actually put out a call for mentors to apply to a certain program, and they will always get like a bigger number than that what they need, so they can still select and filter and so on. So I don't think this is a difficult thing at all. I think this applies to most entrepreneurs in the world, but definitely in our part of the world, entrepreneurs are really helpful and they're always ready to talk, to others about their experiences in an open and very, very humble way.
The other question that came through for you, Mona, is you've spoken about changing mindsets as regards to entrepreneurship. Yusuf Ahmed, who's listening to us now, wants to know what are the mechanisms that you would use, and have there been any examples of successes so far?
Yeah, so the mechanisms that we use are mainly like this innovation process I briefly talked about, and the human-centered design process that, I stress a lot about it in all my courses and all the entrepreneurial programs that we deliver through my EdTech e-learning platform, through like everything I do. And this is it's good enough to make sure that this beginning of change happens or the change, the mind shift, if you want to call it, because when people are forced to get out of their bubble, let's say, or their comfort zone, talk to others, validate certain assumptions that they have, empathize with others, and really try to understand certain needs, this by itself is like changing for them and how they think and how they assume things. So by itself, it's a great experience. And of course, while we continue with this process, like iteration, so this is also a new thing that youth learn, like, okay, it's okay sometimes to go back and change what I've said before, or to go back and change what I thought was the best idea in the world, or go back and change the problem altogether. Also, like the concept of failure, and that, it's okay to fail, and you can just pick up yourself and continue and talk about your learning. This also is another factor of this mind shift. So all of these processes that we work with and that are like predominant in the entrepreneurial supporting ecosystem, I would call it, definitely help a lot. I just want to add one thing about the point that was raised regarding like these restrictions across the borders between one country and the other in this region. And it was really funny, like we went on the Arab SME Summit that was very generously organized by ESCO. It was a great event. And there were some like ecosystem representatives, and we were talking to them, and there were entrepreneurs from all over the Arab world, like Morocco, Tunisia, and Mabruk for Morocco. So basically from all over the world, from all over the Arab world. But the moment you started talking to any a supporting organization, the first question they would ask you, where are you based, right? So in my case, it's an e-learning platform. Like what difference does it make if I'm based in Beirut or in Riyadh or in Amman or in Cairo? So definitely this is super frustrating for entrepreneurs. And I raised this point in one of the discussions that were made about the internationalization, cross cross-border and entrepreneurship, etc. I truly hope that the same governments that Omar talked about, who are playing the role of the other entrepreneurial players, would realize soon enough that it's in their interest, if they would like really to foster entrepreneurship and this new knowledge economy and technology production and so on, to open up their borders in terms of regulation and laws, especially in the Arab world, because we have a great asset that I think we definitely underutilize. We only remember it maybe in the World Cup, is that we have a lot of common points, and definitely our common language is super important as well. So we have great opportunities if we could actually collaborate and cooperate across the different Arab markets. But unfortunately, until today, the regulations of the different countries prohibit that from happening. Definitely, we have some traditional commerce or trade agreements, but in our case, we're talking about entrepreneurship. It's mainly digital and so on. It doesn't really apply for us. So I would definitely like to see some changes there. And I'm hoping that the progressive governments in the Gulf, particularly, would see this benefit soon enough and do something about it.
So the last question that I want to pose to the panel, I don't know who should take it, so I hope someone pipes up, is the concept of peace building. How can we make supporting entrepreneurs and startups a key part of a deliberate and key part of a strategy for stability in these conflict regions and peace building? Who would like to take that?
I'll take a stab at that, if you don't mind. Yeah. I mean, just from since we're working on this, at least from the UN side, there's certainly unity on a daily basis. I think it's really, we're sort of at the fundamental crossroad here also, whereby, we really want to unleash more the potential of the private sector in helping to establish and build peace in these countries, right? And that's not by delivering the traditional aid programs that we have across the Arab region, but this is more about also helping on the one hand, to deal with the regulations and these governments who, in some cases are quite corrupt and, are not really helping to invite the private sector to expand and take care of, business, but also in terms of employment and so on. And on the other hand, also enable and work with the private sector to generate resources to doing exactly that, right? So helping to, stabilize communities by helping to create employment, helping to train people to get jobs and so on and so forth. So there is a much bigger role, I think, in the future for the private sector to help in this domain, rather than leaving it to, the United Nations, NGOs, the government itself. And I think, we are looking forward as UNDP to really, expand this concept in the countries that we work and sort of leave behind, the traditional way of working that we had in the past.
So we're wrapping up here. We have about 2 minutes. Is there anyone else who wanted to make a final comment on anything that we've talked about, or the very rushed conversation on the peace building side of this? Omar, you're unmuted.
I'm trying to think of whether I should say this or not, really.
I've
said already a lot of things today on this panel, but I appreciate your point of view, but it's hard for the private sector to fix something that in many ways the international community screwed up for so long. So the wars in the Middle East, I can't say they're all Western influence. There's a lot of internal problems. There's a lot of external money being pumped in, and I don't know how much we can fix. I can tell you one thing: when the governments leave that open space and they don't really continue to interfere, then entrepreneurs can blossom. And I'll give one example of this, which is today, while the Lebanese government has effectively failed, right, and provides almost no electricity whatsoever, Lebanon is in a blossoming of its solar industry. Really an incredible thing created by so many small companies. Everywhere you look, every rooftop has solar cells now. There are companies that are becoming specialized in this. And I think over time, Lebanon will start to export solar knowledge, skill sets to other markets that want to implement. But here, necessity has been the mother of invention. I don't think entrepreneurs can do peace building, But if the governments get out of the way, then maybe we can help create local services that the government has not been able to deliver themselves.
I like that comment. Governments get out of the way. And on that note, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists chiming in from all over the world, Mona, Jaideep, Auke, and Omar. To our audience, I am Saleha Mohsin signing off. I'm with Bloomberg News. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about the future stability of countries that are experiencing conflict and how the public and private sector can come together to help everyone. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your conference.